Do you want better tones with GarageBand Amp Designer? Are you tired of opening up GarageBand Amp Designer and hearing this? Well, in this video, I'm going to share with you a surefire approach to get the best tones possible with GarageBand Amp Designer. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Band Guide, where we use GarageBand to create professional sounding music. I'm your band guy, Colin, and before we get into guitar tone, I want to give you something. Getting the right tone is essential for creating professional sounding music, but if you don't know how to mix that music, it will never sound completely professional. So I've put together a free 6-step checklist to a pro mix in GarageBand. It walks through the 6 steps that all professional mixes have, and it's completely free from the link in the description below. So be sure to grab that now to help your mixes sound as professional as possible. You can create professional sounding music inside GarageBand. This will help you. But let's go ahead and dive into guitar tone. So the first thing to note about GarageBand Amp Designer is it's only one piece of your overall guitar sound. Everything from your guitar to your pedal board, whether in GarageBand or in real life, to your amp, to your cabinet, to your mic choice, to your mic placement, is going to impact your overall tone. Now, GarageBand gives you an insane amount of control over your amp choice and your cabinet and your mic placement, even your pedal board, but it can't change the guitar that you're recording with. So if you're going for a Telecaster country style guitar and you're recording with a guitar that has heavy EMG pickups, you're going to have a hard time finding that tone. That being said, use what you have, but just keep that in mind. And lastly, this approach that we're going to talk about in this video, it works with all genres. No matter what genre you're doing, it's the same approach. So the tones that we're going to be finding are specific to this song, but when you're working with your music, follow this same approach and you'll be able to create professional sounding guitar tones with GarageBand Amp Designer for free. It's insane. Let's go and jump into the Amp Designer. So this is the GarageBand Amp Designer, and we're going to start with just an overview of what all is in this plugin, what all the different components are, what we can tweak, and then we're going to jump into an exact 5-step process that you can copy to get the best tones possible with this plugin. So first things first, this Amp Designer starts with an amp head, and this is the bulk of the tone. This is where you get a little bit of distortion if you want a little bit of distortion out of the amp. You have an EQ section, you have reverb, you have a tremolo or a vibrato, you have presence, which is kind of intangible, but it's just that like cuttiness of the guitar, and then a master volume at the end here. You can also adjust the output. So if it's sounding good at a higher master output, you could turn this up or down here, however sounds best to you. And you don't just have one amp head, you have 25 different amp heads that you can choose from inside this Amp Designer. An insane amount of options, and all of these amp heads in the real world would be hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. So insane value. And then we move on to the speaker cabinet. Now the speaker cabinet also affects the tone of your guitar sound. So depending on the size of the speaker, 12-inch, 10-inch, and the amount of speakers in the actual cabinet, so it could be 1 speaker all the way up to 4 speakers, they really change the tone of the actual guitar amp. And with that, you also have 25 different speaker configurations. So we have a lot of different options here to really dial in the best sound possible. And then lastly, you have 7 mic options. So we have everything from a super nice, expensive condenser mic to a ribbon mic. Again, these would be hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for several of these microphones. And you have access to all of the different sounds inside this Amp Designer for free. And then you can also set the mic placement. So the mic placement, this is kind of a top-down view of the speaker cone right here. So if it's in the center here, it's right in the middle of the cone. That's going to be your brightest sound. And then as you move it off to the side, it's going to be darker. If you move it further away, it will typically have a little bit less low end. And as you move it closer, it will typically have just a little bit more low end. And then lastly, we also have 2 different types of presets built into this Amp Designer. So the first is right up here where we'd expect them. We have a bunch of presets for clean sounds, crunchy sounds, distorted sounds, all sorts of presets. And these will change every parameter inside the Amp Designer. So it will change the amp head, the cabinet, the speaker, the microphone, the mic location. It will change all of your settings on top of the amp here. It will change your gain and your EQ and what effects are on and how much. All of it at once in one fell swoop. Whereas down here, we have a different type of preset that is just going to change the amp head, the cabinet, and the microphone, but it won't affect any of the parameters that you've already tweaked, any of the parameters you've adjusted. So it'll keep your EQ and your gain and all of these settings exactly where they were. It will also keep your mic location. So we'll change out the mic if it needs to, if it thinks that will sound best, but it will keep the mic location. So these are really quick ways to get inspiration, to try things out, but they're not going to be as good for getting the perfect tone because they're changing out so many parameters at once. It's going to be really hard for you to know which thing changed that you liked or which thing that changed that you need to tweak to get it to be exactly what you want it to be. So you're going to have more success finding a perfect tone if you go through methodically walking through each section and getting the exact tone that you're looking for from each component. So that's the 5-step process I'm going to be sharing with you. Let's go ahead and dive in. Step 1 is to tweak the default amp head to be in the ballpark of what you want your tone to be. So let's listen to this example here. I mean, that's pretty underwhelming. I'm not going to lie to you. It's barely amp in my opinion. There's some songs that would sound great on, but for this, we definitely want a little more distortion, more mid-range out of it, maybe a little less reverb. So let's try to dial that in. So that's already closer. Let's see about these effects here, just so you kind of have a sense of what they do. Yeah, I mean, they're cool, but they're not for this song. And then just this last option here, this presence. Because this is a rhythm part, I don't necessarily want a lot of presence out of this guitar. It's just really filling out the song. And otherwise, that sounds pretty close to me. Okay, so then the second thing we're going to do is we're going to go through every amp head just really quickly, and we're going to work to identify what we think are our top 1 to 3 amp heads, and then we'll go in and narrow it down to our top amp head. As we're going through this, go ahead and pay attention and see if there are amp heads that you think would work well in your song, so you don't necessarily have to go through every single amp head, but I'm going to go through every single amp head in this demonstration, and if you're not sure, go ahead and try every amp head in yours as well. Okay, and then a quick note, this last option here, this is just a preamp, so this is not really an amp head here. It will still run it into the cabinet, but it's a little bit different. So that's not really an amp head. It might work for some songs, but it's definitely not what we want for this song. So the first two that stood out to me were probably this large tweed amp. And it's important when you're going into this, you already kind of have an idea of what you want it to sound like in your head, so that when you're listening through, you're listening for that as you're changing through. So I knew I wanted this to be a little bit gainy, a little bit distorted, and then have just a little bit of character. But you can also just listen for what speaks to you. So you don't need to be super thoughtful about it, but have some idea in your mind what you want it to be. And then the other one that stood out to me was this, let's see, Sunshine, small Sunshine amp. So then to finish out step 2 here, we're just going to go back and forth between whatever our top amp heads are and determine our favorite. So in this case, I'm just going to go back and forth between this and the large tweed amp here. So for me, definitely this one. This is a lot more what I'm looking for. Okay, and then step 3, we're going to change out the cabinet, as I'm sure you could have guessed. So same process. I'm going to go through every single cabinet here. Pay attention, see if any really jump out at you, but you'll likely want to go through the cabinets a little bit more once you've determined your amp head to really make sure you get one that you like. But pay attention to this and note if there's any that jump out at you as being something that you think you're into. So we're starting with just this Tweed 112. Interesting. Okay, and then again, this last option here is direct. So this would be just your amp head going directly into your recording software. It's kind of a neat sound, but again, it's not for this song. Okay, so for me, I think this Tweed 410 jumped out at me, the Modern American, and I think it was this Boutique. Yeah, that Boutique. So I'm just going to jump between those 3 and decide my favorite. Interesting. It's tough. They're all very different. I think I actually like this Tweed 410 best on this. Yeah, I think that sounds the best to me. Okay, and then our 4th step, we're going to play with the mic placement and then decide on the mic that we want. So first thing, we're just going to tweak the mic placement until it sounds best to us. Here it sounds a little darker over here, brighter over here. Sounds great to me. Just off access, it makes it a little bit darker, but it still has a fair amount of brightness to it. Awesome. And then I think being right up close to it sounds great. Okay, and then we're going to change out the mics and decide which one we like best. So a quick rundown, Condenser 87, this is going to be a very, very accurate, detailed condenser mic. Be great on a lot of songs. Condenser 414, similar, a little bit brighter. Dynamic 20, this is RE20, it's kind of a vintagey sound. It's very mid-rangey. 57, classic guitar mic. I mean, this is like the industry standard, but it's a $100 mic. It's insane. Often sounds great. It's often the one I go with, but we'll see today. Dynamic 421, this is just another dynamic mic. So all the dynamics will have a little less detail, but just kind of react differently to transients, to initial hits. And then Dynamic 609, this is another type of dynamic mic, just a different tone. And then a Ribbon 121. A Ribbon mic inherently is a little bit darker. It doesn't have as much brightness. So try them all out and we'll just see what we like. so for me, it's between the 121 and the 609, so I'm just going to decide there. So again, this is a rhythm track, so I don't want that brightness, and that 609 is still just a little bitier, whereas this ribbon is really smooth. So I'm gonna go with this ribbon. I think it sounds great. And then our last step is just going to be to tweak these settings. Now that we have the amp configuration that we want, we know we have the cabinet, we know we have the mic that we want, we're just gonna tweak these amp settings and then maybe the mic placement if we need to. So let's listen to that really quick. I know, as I said, I don't want this to be too bright, so just going to be thinking about that. Awesome. I think it sounds great. So really quick, the way that I approach that is I always scale it up so I can kind of acclimate my ears to it, and then I dial it back and up into the setting where I think it sounds the way that I want it to. So I don't know inherently what present sounds like. So I'll scale it all the way up so I really hear what it's sounding like, and then I'll scale it back and scale it up into where I think it's going to sound best. Now, to be clear, this doesn't mean use this amp setting on your guitar. Use this approach for whatever style song you're recording, whether it's hardcore, rock, all the way up to pop music. If you have a guitar in it, use this same approach to figure out exactly what the right guitar tone for you is. Now again, getting great tones is only one piece of creating professional sounding music. If you really want to create professional sounding music inside GarageBand, be sure to grab my 6-step checklist to a pro mix in GarageBand. It's completely free from the link in the description below. It's really going to help you out. Now, before we go, I always like to finish with a question for you. What I want to know this week is, what is your favorite amp setting inside the Amp Designer? Let me know in the comments below. If this video was helpful, be sure to subscribe, and I'll be back next week with 5 tips for even better guitar tone inside GarageBand. See you then.
One thing at a time.